5 weeks ago, on Sunday the 3rd of May, Sheku Bayoh came into contact with 9 police officers from Kadie police station. Within the space of 15 minutes, he lost consciousness, never to regain consciousness, and was officially pronounced dead at Victoria Hospital. The family have never asked for anything unreasonable. They've simply asked for answers of what happened that morning. They have tried desperately to keep an open mind, and until they still try to do so. They have been subjected in the last 35 days to attempted smears and personal insults, but have refused to be provoked and have refused to defend themselves. They do say this, however, that they refuse to be silenced, intimidated or bullied. They want the word justice, but the Sheku Bayoh family say that without the word truth, there can be no justice. I would like everybody, in respect of Sheku Bayoh, for a 2-minute silence to start, and also to remember that it's unacceptable that police officers remain silent and they must cooperate with the inquiry. Thank you. 5 weeks ago, on Sunday the 3rd of May, Sheku Bayoh came into contact with 9 police officers from Kadie police station. Within the space of 15 minutes, he lost consciousness, never to regain consciousness, and was officially pronounced dead at Victoria Hospital. The family have never asked for anything unreasonable. They've simply asked for answers of what happened that morning. They have tried desperately to keep an open mind, and until they still try to do so. They have been subjected in the last 35 days to attempted smears and personal insults, but have refused to be provoked and have refused to defend themselves. They do say this, however, that they refuse to be silenced, intimidated or bullied. They want the word justice, but the Sheku Bayoh family say that without the word truth, there can be no justice. I would like everybody, in respect of Sheku Bayoh, for a 2-minute silence to start, and also to remember that it's unacceptable that police officers remain silent and they must cooperate with the inquiry. Thank you. 5 weeks ago, on Sunday the 3rd of May, Sheku Bayoh came into contact with 9 police officers from Kadie police station. Within the space of 15 minutes, he lost consciousness, never to regain consciousness, and was officially pronounced dead at Victoria Hospital. The family have never asked for anything unreasonable. They've simply asked for answers of what happened that morning. They have tried desperately to keep an open mind, and until they still try to do so. They have been subjected in the last 35 days to attempted smears and personal insults, but have refused to be provoked and have refused to defend themselves. They do say this, however, that they refuse to be silenced, intimidated or bullied. They want the word justice. For the Sheku Bayoh family say that without the word truth, there can be no justice. I would like everybody, in respect of Sheku Bayoh, for a 2-minute silence to start, and also to remember that it's unacceptable that police officers remain silent and they must cooperate with the inquiry. Thank you. 5 weeks ago, on Sunday the 3rd of May, Sheku Bayoh came into contact with 9 police officers from the Kadie police station. Within the space of 15 minutes, he lost consciousness, never to regain consciousness, and was officially pronounced dead at Victoria Hospital. The family have never asked for anything unreasonable. They've simply asked for answers of what happened that morning. They are trying desperately to keep an open mind, and until they still try to do so. They have been subjected in the last 35 days to attempted smears and personal insults, but have refused to be provoked and have refused to defend themselves. They do say this, however, that they refuse to be silenced, intimidated or bullied. They want the word justice. For the Sheku Bayoh family say that without the word truth, there can be no justice. I would like everybody, in respect of Sheku Bayoh, for a 2-minute silence to start, and also to remember that it's unacceptable that police officers remain silent and they must cooperate with the inquiry. Thank you. 5 weeks ago, on Sunday the 3rd of May, Sheku Bayoh came into contact with 9 police officers from the Kadie police station. Within the space of 15 minutes, he lost consciousness, never to regain consciousness, and was officially pronounced dead at Victoria Hospital. The family have never asked for anything unreasonable. They've simply asked for answers of what happened that morning. They are trying desperately to keep an open mind, and until they still try to do so. They have been subjected in the last 35 days to attempted smears and personal insults, but have refused to be provoked and have refused to defend themselves. They do say this, however, that they refuse to be silenced, intimidated or bullied. They want the word justice. For the Sheku Bayoh family say that without the word truth, there can be no justice. I would like everybody, in respect of Sheku Bayoh, for a 2-minute silence to start, and also to remember that it's unacceptable that police officers remain silent and they must cooperate with the inquiry. Thank you.
5
on Sunday the 3rd of May, Sheku Bayoh came into contact with 9 police officers from Kadie police station. Within the space of 15 minutes, he lost consciousness, lived to regain consciousness, and was officially pronounced dead at Victoria Hospital. The family have never asked for anything unreasonable. They've simply asked for answers of what happened that morning. They have tried desperately to keep an open mind, and until they still try to do so. They have been subjected in the last 35 days to attempted smears and personal insults, but have refused to be provoked and have refused to defend themselves. They do say this, however, that they refuse to be silenced, intimidated or bullied. They want the word justice, but the Sheku Bayoh soundly say that without the word truth, there can be no justice. I would like everybody, in respect of Sheku Bayoh, for a 2-minute silence to start, and also to remember that it's unacceptable that police officers remain silent and they must cooperate with the inquiry. Thank you. 3rd of May, Sheku Bayoh came into contact with 9 police officers from Kadie police station. Within the space of 15 minutes, he lost consciousness, lived to regain consciousness, and was officially pronounced dead at Victoria Hospital. The family have never asked for anything unreasonable. They've simply asked for answers of what happened that morning. They have tried desperately to keep an open mind, and until they still try to do so. They have been subjected in the last 35 days to attempted smears and personal insults, but have refused to be provoked and have refused to defend themselves. They do say this, however, that they refuse to be silenced, intimidated or bullied. They want the word justice, but the Sheku Bayoh soundly say that without the word truth, there can be no justice. I would like everybody, in respect of Sheku Bayoh, for a 2-minute silence to start, and also to remember that it's unacceptable that police officers remain silent and they must cooperate with the inquiry. Thank you. Five weeks ago, on Sunday the 3rd of May, Sheku Bayoh came into contact with 9 police officers from Kadie police station. Within the space of 15 minutes, he lost consciousness, lived to regain consciousness, and was officially pronounced dead at Victoria Hospital. The family have never asked for anything unreasonable. They've simply asked for answers of what happened that morning. They have tried desperately to keep an open mind, and until they still try to do so. They have been subjected in the last 35 days to attempted smears and personal insults, but have refused to be provoked and have refused to defend themselves. They do say this, however, that they refuse to be silenced, intimidated or bullied. They want the word justice, but the Sheku Bayoh soundly say that without the word truth, there can be no justice. I would like everybody, in respect of Sheku Bayoh, for a 2-minute silence to start, and also to remember that it's unacceptable that police officers remain silent and they must cooperate with the inquiry. Thank you. 5 weeks ago, on Sunday the 3rd of May, Sheku Bayoh came into contact with 9 police officers from the Kadie police station. Within the space of 15 minutes, he lost consciousness, never to regain consciousness, and was officially pronounced dead at Victoria Hospital. The family have never asked for anything unreasonable. They've simply asked for answers of what happened that morning. They have tried desperately to keep an open mind, and until they still try to do so. They have been subjected in the last 35 days to attempted smears and personal insults, but have refused to be provoked and have refused to defend themselves. They do say this, however, that they refuse to be silenced, intimidated or bullied. They want the word justice, but the Sheku Bayoh soundly say that without the word truth, there can be no justice. I would like everybody, in respect of Sheku Bayoh, for a 2-minute silence to start, and also to remember that it's unacceptable that police officers remain silent and they must cooperate with the inquiry.
After a few technical hurdles, we've managed to collect a good number of people here today for the Black Lives Matter protests. Black Lives Matter. We cannot breathe. Justice for Sheku Bayoh. I want to wish everybody a good evening and hope that you're staying well, and welcome you to this virtual rally to demonstrate that Black Lives Matter and continue our collective bid for justice for Sheku Bayoh and his family, who was brutally killed in an altercation with the police in the streets of Dunfermline, here in our beloved Scotland. My name is Gozi Jo Adigwe. I'm a member of Community Union and an STUC Black Workers Committee member. The events over the past few weeks have shone a light not only upon the ingrained racism in the US, but across the world, not least here in Scotland and the UK. And I think it's very important that while we take cognizance and we understand what's happening globally around racism, we give it a very Scottish context. For far too long, the treatment of Black workers and Black people regarding the Scottish justice system has been negative. Often our voices are drowned out or not heard at all. The STUC understands that people want to demonstrate, and quite rightly, and it's difficult to do that in lockdown. In these uncertain times, we have to do as much as we can without putting our health, physical and mental health, at risk, and that of our families, friends and neighbours. This is why we've organised this virtual rally today and encouraged everyone to make posters for their windows and join in today's conversation. Because what this conversation is about is about all of us in Scotland. It's not only about campaigning for equality, it's about campaigning for celebrating the diversity in our country, in Scotland. And most importantly, it's how all of us stand together to stamp racism out. So we begin this process by recommitting ourselves to get justice for the Bayoh family, in the same way that George Floyd's family will be doing the same, starting that process. Sheku Bayoh lost his life 5 years ago, and we're still waiting for justice with regards to that. This is the time to now right the wrongs and say enough is enough. No to racism anywhere in Scotland and in the world. So we stand together to stamp that out. We have a few speakers today that are going to give us some of their experience and insights into what they understand about what's happening here in Scotland. And it is very important that we have a Scottish context. Our first speaker is Rozanne Foyer, STUC General Secretary Designate, who in March became the first ever female trade unionist to lead our movement. Rozanne, can I ask you to speak, please?
Thank you very much, Gozi. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, so firstly, I would just like to put out the message that the Scottish trade union movement stands full square behind all of those around the world, all of the citizens around the world, and particularly those citizens in the US who have stood up to say enough is enough and that this racist violence must stop. And thirdly, George Floyd's killing at the hands of the justice system in the US is not an isolated incident. Sadly, the US is not the only country where we have to stand up and say Black Lives Matter. And sadly, in Britain and in Scotland, we're not innocent parties in the long story of racism against Black people. Our empires, our wealth, and our entire economic systems were built upon the concepts of slavery and servitude, where the lives of the rich and privileged mattered more than others, and Black lives have mattered the least of all. And the implications of that system are what are still playing out today. And we have to admit to them, we have to continue to expose them, and we have to challenge them and address them. And this can be seen in the death and injury of Black and minority ethnic people in both the Scottish and the wider UK justice systems today. And such cases are a violent and sickening symptom of a far deeper and wider problem of systematic and institutional racism in our society. This is our legacy. We have to face up to it and we have to address it. And so that means that we have to ensure that this movement that is building is more than just a movement to express our anger and our solidarity, although that is very, very important. And it means that we have to ensure that this moment marks the beginning of something deeper, a deeper response to addressing the issues of racism that still exist throughout our society. And that can start with the redoubling of our efforts to achieve justice for Sheku Bayoh. And we certainly hope that that will be achieved because that family has waited long enough for justice. But we also have a duty to ensure that the wider questions of race play a central role in the debate that we're currently generating and entering into about how we can build back a fairer economy post-coronavirus. How do we rebuild a society that values people before profit? And we'll have to ask some key questions as part of that debate. We'll have to ask, why is the poverty rate higher in our BAME communities? We'll have to ask, why is health poorer in our BAME communities? And we'll have to ask, why has the coronavirus had a disproportionate effect on BAME workers? These are the sort of structural inequalities that we must get to the heart of, putting them alongside questions of class, gender, and other characteristics in our society. We've got an opportunity right now to really challenge the dogma of a capitalism that for too long has put profits before people. And in this debate, we will continue to press the message that Black lives matter. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rozanne. Those were really inspiring words. And I think they are some of the key messages that we need to continue to think about at this point. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, the STUC is today once again recommitting to the campaign we first supported 5 years ago when Sheku Bayoh was killed outside his home in Dunfermline following an altercation with the police. We're now joined by Sheku's sister, and I'd like to invite Kadie to speak about her experiences over that time.
Hello. Hello.
Hi.
Can you hear me? Hi. Thank you all for having me here today. It's been 5 years now since we lost our brother Sheku Bayoh in the hands of the police. 5 years on, we are still suffering, we are still struggling. We ask the question every day, why did our brother have to die? We feel that there was no need for him to die because the way the police met him and the way they handled him, it was just due to his race. And we believe race played a part in his death from the start. But we were still keeping an open mind, trusting in the authorities for things to go the right way. The park took over, and as time went on, we thought things were going the way it's supposed to go, but we quickly felt that they were just not doing the right thing. We lost confidence in them. And we met with the Lord Advocate last year. His decision as well not to prosecute any police officer, that also broke our heart a lot. We felt we were treated with no respect at all. We felt really as if we were not like worthy actually. So, you know, we just want justice. We just want the truth. We want support. We want people to stand in solidarity for me and my family and Sheku's friends and his 2 boys for justice and to know the truth. We want changes. We want changes in Scotland. We want to move in the streets freely like anybody else. We don't want to be moving in the streets and we are scared. If the police stop us, what will happen? We want to be free like anybody else because we deserve the same as everybody else. Like I said earlier, we are Black people, but we are not bad people. And my brother deserves justice. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Kadie. At this point, has anyone got any comments or questions that they'd like to ask? No? Okay, I'll move on. Thank you, Kadie. I know I speak for everybody that's on this forum at the moment and for a wider network, a wider broad church of support when we stand in complete solidarity with you in your family getting justice, however long that may be. We'll now hear from someone who's closely linked to the campaign for justice for Sheku, and someone who has a track record of standing up to racism, Aamer Anwar.
Hi, Gozi, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Aamer.
Okay. Thanks very much to the STUC for organising this today and a very short notice, and also to Kadie Johnson. I know how difficult it was for Kadie, for the Sheku Bayoh family, not to attend the demonstrations today. They thought that was the right decision. Kadie, of course, works as a staff nurse, and she thought that the risk to life was too much. But I also want to say thank you to the many thousands across Scotland and across the United Kingdom who have marched, who have demonstrated today. I might not have agreed with them attending because of COVID-19, but it shows the extent of anger at racial injustice that exists within this society. Because this isn't, people ask me the question over the last 2 weeks saying, well, you know, why George Floyd? It's an issue that struck a chord right across this planet because of racial injustice that exists, not just in the United States. And we need to remember that when we talk about George Floyd, it was Kadie that said yesterday and the day before, it says, Scotland's George Floyd is Sheku Bayoh. The Sheku Bayoh family have been fighting for 5 years for justice. You know, when we look at the TV screen pictures, when we see the riots, when we see the police rioting, the state rioting, the violence of the police in the United States against the demonstrators, we have been there before. You could replace the pictures with the 1950s and the 1960s and the civil rights movement, and it would almost seem exactly the same. But one piece of hope that I've got from the last week or so of watching the pictures is the fact of the movement is now dominated by young black and young white people who have said enough is enough. But when we talk today and when people demonstrated today, one thing that stood out for me, and I apologize for my anger, because it's also frustration. Having fought racism for 30 years in this country, and it seems to me that every so often along comes a family in the midst of their grief, having to set up a campaign. And no one can understand the pain and the absolute pain that you feel when you have lost a loved one, and in the midst of your grief, having to set up a campaign simply to ask for justice. And remember this, it's not just Sheku Bayoh. Since 1969 in this country, there have been 3,000 deaths in custody. And ask the question, how many police officers have been successfully prosecuted for homicide, for the charges of homicide in the United Kingdom, in a democracy? And the answer is 0. 1,841 since 1990. And the answer is 0. So when you want to talk about George Floyd, then you start. And if you want to fight racial injustice, and if you think Black Lives Matter, it's not just about hashtags. It's not just about the selfies. It's not just about hanging the banners outside the window. And all these things are important because it meant a great deal for Kadie, because today was the 5th anniversary of the funeral, the day that she lay her brother to rest, but he does not rest as far as the family is concerned. Today was the day that we marched with his coffin through the streets of KIRCALDY, demanding justice. And so today that is what happened. And what we said right at the start of this campaign was that the dead cannot cry out for justice. It's the duty of the living to do so for them. But time and time again, what happens is that Black people, once they die at the hands of the police, they are criminalized, they are stereotyped, they are stigmatized. And what happens is it's in order to negate their right to life. Now, I am proud of the trade union movement, because people will ask me, why the trade union movement? Over the years in Scotland, it's been the trade union movement that has always come to the aid of the Black and Asian and minority ethnic community, as they did some 20 years ago for the Choker family after a racist murder. Now, like Surjit Singh Choker, I never knew Sheku Bayoh. What I do know is that he wasn't a rich man, he wasn't a powerful man, but he had a stubborn family, 3 sisters, a mother, a brother-in-law, his partner Colette, and he also had 2 young sons. And this family has refused to be patronized, to be bullied, to be lied to or silenced. And I think it's very important to remember what actually happened to Sheku on the 3rd of May 2015 at 7:30 a.m. What happened was that police received reports of a Black man walking down the street acting erratically with a knife, and 6 police vehicles were dispatched. 6 police vehicles. The first 2 officers to arrive on the scene, Sheku walking down the street, open palms, No knife in his hand. No knife was ever found upon him. He never brandished a knife. He had never attacked a police officer knife. But what was the response of the police who greeted him? They used CS spray, they used pepper spray, they used batons, and he was brought to the ground in less than 1 minute. And he had a total of up to 9 police officers involved in the restraint and some 6 officers on him. Some 54 separate injuries, lacerations, a broken rib. And he lost, when you say the words, "I can't breathe," about George Floyd, his family, Sheku Bayoh's family, has said, he said the words, "I can't breathe. Get off me." The first 2 officers who were on top of him weighed between 40 to 50 stones. I know with young children, the amount of times I say to the older ones, get off the younger one because they cannot breathe. But when you're talking about maybe 6 officers on top of him, holding him down, ankle cuffs, leg restraints, handcuffs, and then losing consciousness rapidly within the space of a few minutes, never ever to recover. He was taken to the hospital in which Kadie was working, and he was officially pronounced dead. He had no previous history of violence. And I'll say this, because the lies and the stigmatization started straight after Sheku died. The police sources that told the press and the politicians that he brandished a knife and he attacked people with a knife, that he had taken drugs. Well, there was no knife. And even if Sheku Bayoh had taken drugs, so what? Did he not have a right to life? Did he not deserve the right to live? And if he was breaking the law, then the police had to act. They had to act, but they had to act reasonably, legitimately, and proportionately, and he had the right to life. And I will say this, that many people have said, well, what about the race? Race didn't come from us. The question of race didn't come from us. It was the family of one of the police officers who got in touch with the Sheku Bayoh family and then with the BBC to say that one of the officers was a racist and that he hated black people and he had been violent to their own family. And then that was exposed. The family trusted the PIRC, the independent investigators. They trusted the Lord Advocate to investigate. And this is what I will say to you, Zess. Why is it that when a black person dies in police custody, it can take up to 5 years for the Crown Office to investigate that death? Because I'll tell you what, if it had been 9 black people that had surrounded a white man and he had died in suspicious circumstances in restraint, it wouldn't take 5 years for the Crown to decide whether they were going to prosecute or not. But that's exactly what happened in the case of Sheku Bayoh. It took 5 years to make that decision. And then it goes to the police. Those police officers went straight back to the police station in KIRCALDY. They sat in the same canteen room for some 8 hours and they were able to converse with each other. They were able to speak to each other, but they denied the independent investigators statements for some 32 days. In my 20 years as a criminal defense lawyer, I have never known the police to put 8 suspects in a room together, let alone the fact that they did this with 9 police officers. As for the policewoman who feared for her life, let me just put the fact out there. That policewoman who was injured went to the hospital and was released some 35 minutes later and went back to the police station to join her colleagues and to sit in that police station for up to 8 hours. That was the extent of the injuries at the time. Sheku Bayoh was dead. He never got up. He never got to go and see his family, and the family feel betrayed by the Scottish criminal justice system. And of course, we now have a public inquiry. And there are those who say, well, we should remain quiet. And of course, the Police Federation have been very quiet for the last 2 weeks since the death of George Floyd. But the only thing they have said was today in the Sunday Mail, with the complaints that the Police Federation made about police officers taking the knee. I, for one, am uncomfortable about certain individuals, politicians taking the knee, leaders of nations taking the knee, but I will not condemn those who do wish to take the knee. And for the Police Federation to speak out today of all days to complain about officers, one of whom is a high-profile Asian officer taking the knee, what I'll say is, why don't you concentrate on the public inquiry? Why don't you concentrate on giving the facts to the family and giving them justice? Because that is what the family want. The family said from day one, we only want to know the truth. But what we'll say is this: 5 days of protest and civil unrest in the United States has given the family of George Floyd, the black community in the United States, more than we will ever get. Because within 5 days, it was decided that 4 police officers will stand trial for the death of George Floyd. And in 5 years of campaigning, In 5 years of the Scottish criminal justice system, those police officers, not one of them will ever stand trial. Not for the charge of murder, not for the charge of culpable homicide, not for the charge of serious assault, not for the charge of assault, attempt to pervert the course of justice, or any breach of health and safety regulations. Why is it 3,000 deaths since 1969 and not one single successful prosecution? That is a burning injustice that exists in us. And I will say this to you. I will say this to all those people who are watching today. This is not just about one demonstration. This family has fought for 5 years, and I say this on a personal basis. You can hear the anger in my voice. I am tired of grieving at gravesides. Our community is tired of grieving at gravesides. I want a day that we can celebrate the lives of our Black brothers and sisters rather than grieving their loss at the hands of racial violence. So we need you. We need the people who are listening here today. We need you to do more than just hashtags. We need you to support the campaign for justice of Sheku Bayoh. It has been relaunched today by the Scottish TUC. We need you to get the message out. We need you to support the crowdfunder, and we need you to join the line. We need you to take the knee when it comes, when we appear at the public inquiry. We need you to contact your MSPs. And I'll say this to every single politician, with a few honourable exceptions, to every public figure that went out and put up the name of George Floyd and said Black Lives Matter and their hearts were broken. Where were you in 5 years when we fought for the family of Sheku Bayoh and we heard nothing from you? Say his name, Sheku Bayoh, and do not stop. The powers that be carry a heavy responsibility. Then no officer should ever be above the law. We know, and the family know, they will never really get justice, but they want the truth. They want a legacy. They want a legacy of Sheku Bayoh. They want his two sons to grow up being proud of a father that they never knew. He had lots of similarities to George Floyd. He was a loving father. He was a loving partner. He was a loving son, and he was a loving brother. But as I said, the similarities end there, because in George Floyd's case, 4 officers will face trial. In Sheku Bayoh, they will never, ever face trial. We will soon, hopefully, begin the public inquiry. And of course, there's people who have condemned the Scottish government. That's for them to do so. But what I will say is this: the public inquiry will start. What is essential that people keep their eyes on it, that they come to the public inquiry, that they stand outside the public inquiry, they write to their politicians, and they remember this. This inquiry will also investigate the question of race, and it's still to be picked. The panel members and the assessors that will sit aside the senior High Court Judge Lord Brackadale, simply a white upper middle class judge that was sitting there, but the people who had the background, their diversity in the background, to be able to guide a judge to see what when they see racism. And I'll say this to the Police Federation, who spoke out today, because they have also attacked the Sheku Bayoh family repeatedly. When you have an organization whose committee is made up of 137 white police officers, you have a problem. When you have a parliament that only has 2 Black or Asian representatives, you have a problem. This society has had a problem. When I had my teeth smashed out in 1991 by Strathclyde police officers, and I took my case to court, and it took 4 years, and in the 4 years I was arrested some 20 times, and several times I appeared in court, eventually to win my case and to be told, you made legal history. You're the first Black or Asian person to win a case for a racist attack by the police. Why am I, since 1991 and 95 when I won my case, still the only person? We need for that to change, and it isn't just carrying placards and banners, and we need our politicians to know that this movement is not going away. This movement is launched today. We will get justice. We will not give up until we get justice and truth for Sheku Bayoh and for all those people. For Ahmed Sheikh, murdered in the 1980s, a Somalian refugee killed by casuals and racists and individuals who walked away for that murder. Remember Surjit Singh Chokha. Remember Imran Khan, who died and murdered because of racism. And also remember the case of Chris Donald. There has been case after case in this country. And just because we don't have the mobile phone footage doesn't mean it didn't happen. We had the CCTV. We have seen the statements. We know what has gone on, and we want it to be exposed, and the family need your support. We need your support. We cannot stop fighting for this. And please, I beg you, I plead with you to say, do not walk away from this movement now, because you will never be forgiven. This is an opening of an opportunity for the people of Scotland to say, we don't just care about Black lives in the United States, but we also think Black Lives Matter in Scotland. Support the crowdfunder. The dead cannot cry out for justice, but it's the duty of the living to do so for them. Thank you so much.
Aamer, I'm always filled with, you know, a certain kind of emotion when I hear you speak about Sheku Bayoh. And for people that don't know the details of what happened to him and what has been happening to his family through this time, then I hope a number of them have got a sense of that now. Now, obviously the STUC have been supporting this. We want people to sign up to the campaign and join the campaign on the STUC Facebook and Twitter pages, but also, just like you say, be more conscious about how we speak to people about this particular issue. I think in Scotland we get the sense that, well, doesn't really happen here, you know, it's not that much of a problem, but it only really has to happen once to see the ripples of effect that has on families, friends, children, etc. So I thank you very much for that impassioned discourse. I'm now going to pass over to the STUC's chairperson, Usman Ali, to address the rally.
Thank you very much, Gozi. And can I just add to what you've just said about the contributions we've just heard from both Kadie and Aamer. I've been monitoring our Facebook Live comments that have been coming in from those that are also watching, and it's clearly resonating that their contributions have been very powerful indeed. I'd also like to thank STUC colleagues, particularly Dave Moxham, for pulling out all the stops to organise today's virtual rally. And I begin my remarks tonight by reaffirming once again the STUC Black Workers Committee's full support with the Justice for Sheku Bayoh campaign. We continue to stand in complete solidarity with Sheku's family and add our collective strength and voice in the bid to get justice for Sheku. What happened on the streets of Dunfermline in 2015 is no less horrific or noteworthy than what we saw on the streets of Minneapolis to George Floyd in 2020. Another year passes and Scotland's Black workers and communities are still dealing with the reality of facing racism and discrimination in our schools, in our workplaces and on our streets. I recall times gone by when my grandparents and parents shared with me the harsh realities of being a person of colour in Scotland, despite giving their all in service to Scotland or even being born a Scot. It's often said the struggles of future generations should be different to those of previous generations. The life that should have gotten better for the next generation. But sadly, this is not the case. This is not the case for my generation. And even more alarming is at this rate, I feel it won't be any better for the next generation either. Unless we stand up and we take the action we need to take now. The coronavirus is not just a health pandemic, but a social and economic pandemic too. That's particularly the case for Scotland's Black and minority ethnic workers and communities, because they've been hit the hardest. And I know more evidence has been commissioned here in Scotland, but I fear the results could be inconclusive, because what the coronavirus has highlighted is that Black and minority ethnic workers are more likely to work in jobs which carry the most risks, that Black and minority ethnic workers are less likely to work in roles with decision-making powers and authority in the workplace, that Black and minority ethnic workers were more likely to be lower paid, and Black and ethnic minority workers will more likely not have their voices heard, and that they'll be more likely to suffer from bullying, racism and discrimination in the workplace. That's the long-standing situation Black and minority ethnic workers have faced for so long in Scotland. And don't just take it from me. Ask yourself, what do you see? What do you see when you go into your child's school to see the head teacher? What do you see when you look at the senior managers and consultants in our NHS? What do you see when you look at the directors and chief executives in Scottish councils and government? The answer will mostly be white and probably male, especially in the higher ranks of professions and power. This is what we must now call time on. And as we enter the third decade of the 21st century, the STUC Black Workers Committee is leading that call here in Scotland to call time. Calling time on racial and gender discrimination. Calling time on white-only power. Calling time on our public services, from the top to the bottom, not reflecting the communities they serve at every level. For several STUC Black Workers conferences now, I've moved motions which challenges and calls on different types of public services to outline and deliver meaningful action to get more non-white, non-male people taking up jobs in teaching, healthcare, social care, working for the council and government, and to see them serve in the middle management and top corporate level ranks, instead of just being stuck at the bottom, having to suffer low pay and no voice. Some would describe this as an aspiration that could be hoped for. Others would dismiss it as just a dream. I say otherwise. I say this could become our reality if we all take the steps now to fight for change. We need to push the teaching profession to find more Black and minority ethnic people to become teachers and then support them to become our head teachers. We need to have Black and minority ethnic consultants and surgeons have the authority to run our NHS. We need to have Black and minority ethnic police officers at the top of our police service. We need to have Black and minority ethnic council workers, not just cleaning parks and collecting the rubbish, but also becoming the directors of education and the directors of health and social care and in charge of local authorities as chief executive. And having 2 Black and minority ethnic MSPs and 1 Black and minority ethnic Scottish cabinet minister means very little if we do not get the seismic change across the whole Scottish public sector. Let me be clear, our diverse communities must be reflected in our public services and at every level, from top to bottom. The STUC Black Workers Committee has been mandated by our 2019 conference to formulate and call for strong action to address this major discrimination facing Scotland today. This is why I'm delighted to announce the social media launch of our Break the Race Ceiling campaign, which will look at Black and minority ethnic recruitment and progression across the whole of Scotland's public sector. I would ask all of you to like our Facebook page and share the message that change must happen now. If this racial and gender discrimination is allowed to continue, then Black and minority ethnic people, young and old, will continue to be deprived of their full rights and the hope of what could be. Decisions will continue to be made and approaches will continue to be taken which do not meet the needs of Scotland's diverse communities. The STUC Black Workers Committee is taking the steps to put this right, and we ask everyone, all of you, to join us as we campaign and fight to rid Scotland of this racial and gender discrimination and build a more equal, fairer and just Scotland for this generation and the next. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Usman. As eloquent as ever, and I think it is important as well for us to realise that discrimination touches everybody in a variety of different ways. You mentioned about women, children, people with disabilities, but our cause here is really about race. And I think in Scotland, because we do have some real priorities around dealing with racial inequality, we have to try and get people behind that movement. But I thank you very much for your contribution. And as Usman said, Break the Race Ceiling campaign is online. So if anyone is interested, if it's in your nature to get behind that, then it would be really respected. We do need a broad approach to this issue because that's what communities are. So now to hear another perspective about the issues we've just heard about, I'd like to invite the SNP convener and councillor Graham Campbell to speak. Graham, you're with us.
Good evening, comrades and friends, brothers and sisters, family and acquaintances all over Scotland. I'm honoured to share the panel that I'm part of today, and particularly impressed to hear once again the very powerful testimony of Kadie and Aamer today about what happened 5 years ago. I too was there that day 5 years ago today at the funeral and the march and procession through KIRCALDY, and it was one of the saddest things I've ever seen. And I think a lot of us at the time who knew about that incident felt viscerally the anger and frustration that police in Scotland and then this in that small town could think that just do such a grievous killing in the first place, but to then do what they did to try to defeat the ends of justice. I can't go into the details, but you know the score. Not only did they not do what was right, they did everything they can to misinform, mislead the family, indeed semi-criminalize the family, besmirch the name of Sheku Bayoh, to make up stories about what actually happened. And then when we find out what actually happened, it has so much reminiscence of the situation we've just seen with George Floyd that it brings back all of those memories once again. But I think at the time, we have to be honest, at the time, not enough people stood up to recognize what was going on. And indeed, I have to say, even within my community, the African community, it was perhaps because it didn't happen in a major city like Glasgow and Edinburgh or Dundee, where there's a strong African community, that lots of us didn't see it. And lots of people as well forget the fact that Sheku was a Muslim. And yet many Muslims in this country, until this week perhaps, didn't know about the Sheku Bayoh case. I suppose, if Black Lives Matter to anybody more, it's to the Bayoh family, because really this case encapsulates why institutionalized racism and policing, the ideas and thoughts and feelings that those officers had, didn't come from nowhere. It wasn't rotten apples in a barrel. It's a rotten barrel, because the institution that Scotland has created, whether it's courts, institutions, prisons, police, they are hardwired with a DNA that comes from racism, colonialism, and slavery. So when we're saying Black Lives Matter, we're not simply saying a trite humanistic thing. The hashtag comes from a record and history of struggle, from the struggles in Los Angeles, Chicago, Detroit, and also Ferguson. And we made that connection 5 years ago when Ferguson activists came to the UK, and they came to Glasgow and Edinburgh, and we made them aware of the Sheku Bayoh case, and we saw the parallels. We have to sort of acknowledge that Scottish public life has not done enough. That's why the Bayoh family have waited for 5 years. We also have to acknowledge that some of the mistakes are ours, that we have to own the fact that our institutions failed miserably to act at the time. And because they've denied justice to that family, as Aamer says, anybody else who'd done what those police officers had done would have been arrested and jailed tout de suite. But it didn't happen because of racism. We have to acknowledge that our system and our country is not only capable of perpetrating racism, it does so on a casual daily basis. That's why today so many young people did not heed our call to not march today. And there's a good reason for that. They felt and tapped into the anger and frustration that was happening in the States and all over the world at racialized police violence. That's not new. What's new is that this week, in just 5 days, as Anwar says, the result would happen that all the 4 officers were charged, were fired, and charged with murder. Now, when did that happen before? In 5 short days, Minneapolis and across the United States achieved that. Yet we've had to wait 5 years because we've been polite, quiet, reasonable, calm, dignified. That's a word that we often hear said to the Johnson and to the Bayoh family, to say how dignified they have been. And yet it's patronizing if nobody does anything about it. If still those police officers walk the streets uncharged, unprosecuted, uninvestigated, and if racism stays institutionalized in the way this country polices the Black community. We may not have the same level of deaths and destruction and oppression at the same level of violence that we have even in England. compared to the United States here in Scotland. But we do have a problem. And young people today showed us that the everyday racism of discrimination, institutionalized, microaggressions in their daily lives, the failure to get the proper employment they should, the discriminations they face in shopping centres, in classrooms, at the hands of security guards, followed around stores, people not sitting next to them in buses, neighbours calling the police out about their loud music, supposedly. All of these daily life microaggressions, racisms, have contributed to that sense of frustration that young people who've grown up in this very country feel. So when we're saying, making speeches about how we're all Jack Thompson's beds, that doesn't wash, and quite rightly so. It's nonsense. And we have to accept that our institutions need fundamental root and branch change and transformation. Now, the public inquiry that's been called will help us to at least get some of the answers as to why what happened to Sheku Bayoh happened. But it will be in vain if we don't mobilize that massive feeling that's out there. The Black Lives Matter is a really important, fresh moment in the development of an anti-racist movement here. And I'm very pleased that many people, white people particularly, showed their solidarity with that movement. But let's not leave it at the hashtag phase and putting images on your Facebook. It's got to come into real life in your communities, in your daily actions and interactions with ordinary people. If you don't challenge racism, both personally and institutionally where you see it, who else will do it? There has to be a sea change here. And the Black Lives Matter movement is part of that. And I wish that they had been represented here today, because I think that's a perspective we need to hear as to why they did not heed our call to respect the lockdown. But we totally understand. If that had not been in lockdown, today's march would have been much, much bigger, and it would have been one of the most important events in Scottish and Black Scottish political history. Today, we have a moment where Black Lives Matter has meant that African and Black and BME Scots have arrived, particularly the younger generation, politically, to organise themselves to fight their injustice, to fight institutionalised racism. We must be standing shoulder to shoulder with them, but we also must demand that they, in turn, support the Sheku Bayoh campaign and make sure that we achieve our goals, that racism does get challenged and racism goes, but it must require us to overthrow the institutions that we have derived from slavery, imperialism, and colonialism, and have them acknowledged in the telling of the story of this country.
Graham, thank you so much for that. And I think that sort of links in very, sort of tightly with what Usman was saying about just being able to see the progression of Black people going through different professions. When we see that happening to a significant extent, then one would like to think that there would be more of diversity, less of groupthink, more opportunities to think about different ways of how we do things better in Scotland. And also I hear exactly what you're saying about Scottish heritage. We haven't acknowledged that enough in the past, and we have to start doing that more so that people in Scotland, all of us, are aware of where the wealth and the heritage of Scotland comes from. But I'm also very conscious that, the Sheku Bayoh campaign it's a personal matter. I was at the funeral of Sheku Bayoh as well, and I was really filled with emotion at the reaction of the people of Kirkcaldy. I didn't see that followed up by any real, sort of momentum to become involved in campaigns, etc. And that, sat a little bit uneasy with me. So maybe we have some work to do with our ethnic communities about how we organise and campaign. Anyway, thank you, Graham, as ever. So we're going to move on to hear from Hannah Lavery, who's going to share some of her experiences. Hannah.
Hi. My name is Hannah Lavery, and I've been invited to speak tonight because last year I wrote, with the support of the Lyceum Theatre, a play called The Lament for Sheku Bayoh, and I will end with a short reading from it. The play lays out what happened to Sheku, but it's also a personal response, my personal response. As a daughter of a Black man, as a mother to a brown son, as a mixed race Scot, as a citizen of this country, a citizen that is often told that the Scotland I know is not the Scotland they know, that my experiences are wrong, I am mistaken, that challenging the narrative, the one in which they paint for themselves and others, risks my own belonging. When I wrote this play, the majority of folk I would speak to about him had never heard of him. Sheku who? They told me that it must have been in the news, that it must have not been in the news, that it was not reported on. It was. I found the information about Sheku Bayoh easily. We, and I am as much we as I am other, we have for so long silenced anything which disputes the tale we like to tell of ourselves. We have pushed it from us, and we can no longer do this. We must not do this. We must demand it. It is a time for honesty. It has been time for the longest time. I will end on this extract from my lament for Sheku Bayoh. She says, I wouldn't want to be a Black man. She says, I think about my nephews. I think about my son, I say. We talk in whispers. A white man asks if the seat is free. We say, yes, and then bunch up to the very edge of the table, lower our voices once more. I remember hearing about it on the news. Yes, I say. I think I first became aware of it, maybe when something about the campaign came up on my timeline. What did you do then? She says. Nothing. Maybe I liked it. Not liked the angry face thing. I shared it. I look down and I am tearful. Suddenly, it surprises me. She says, I know it's painful. Yes, it hurts. The man beside us is talking loudly at the waitress. We are silent until he settles. I was at the doctor's the other day, she says. A locum. I know where this is going, but I don't interrupt. And then it's me and I remember at school, and then her, I was on the bus the other day, then me, I was in the taxi the other day, and her, I was on the street, me at work, and we talk the whole time in whispers, huddled together. And then she says, I'm so angry. Sometimes it just slips. Me too, I say. We ordered cake to share. Funny thing is, we only just met. Sorry, she said, but is this seat free? Of course, I said. What is it that you're reading? She said. It's a story. It was in the news. Sheku Bayoh. Yes, you know, she whispers. I would hate to be a Black man. Yes, I said. I think about my nephews, she says. I think about my son, I said. Thank you very much.
Hannah, thank you so much for that. Some of us on this forum might recognise aspects of that very deeply, but for those that don't, you know, that kind of is the experience sometimes of the lives that we live. So thank you so much for that. I know we're moving towards the kind of final section and we're going to hear from politicians now, which is always great. So I'm also conscious that there are a number of messages coming up in the chat. Now, I've not got access to the chat, so hopefully Karina can help me share some of the links and campaigns that we've been talking about within this group and beyond, hopefully. Okay, thanks, Hannah. So we're moving finally to the last section of this rally. I'd like to invite Kirsten Oswald, the MP for East Renfrewshire and convener of the SNP, to say a few words.
Thanks very much, Gozi, and thanks also to the STUC for having me join you today. I'm glad to be here, and I'm really grateful that I was able to listen to what Kadie said and to listen to all of these very powerful speeches and stand in solidarity with all of you, because these are the voices that we need to hear just now if we're serious about understanding and if we're serious about wanting change. As an MP, I get a lot of emails, especially at the moment, but the sheer numbers of emails about Trump, about George Floyd, expressing solidarity with the Black Lives Matter campaign and asking about Sheku Bayoh is remarkable, and it's testament to the strength of feeling across Scotland. All of these emails have one thread running through them. We need to see racism. We need to see where it is. We need to understand its history. We need to acknowledge it if we want change. And we need action if we want to make that happen. It feels to me as if this might be a tipping point. Actually, I think it has to be the tipping point, and goodness knows that's been a long time coming. Just listen to the speakers who've gone before me who have so much direct experience that I don't. It is time to listen and to ask questions and to act. What's happening in America at the moment is appalling. It's horrifying. And the reaction of Trump to George Floyd's murder and to the protests across America is astonishing. Let's be crystal clear. Donald Trump has shown us who he is and what he is. He is a racist. He's a danger to democracy and justice, and he's a danger to all minority communities. That's the reality that should underline all of our dealings with him. The UK government has to stop selling him the means to harm his own population, who've got the audacity to stand up for justice. And this cozying up to Trump, this special relationship love-in, also has to stop. He's shown us time and again who he is. We should believe him. We should call him out for his racism. We can't look the other way. But it isn't just in America, so let's not kid ourselves on that. And actually, not being like America is a pretty low bar to set ourselves at the moment. There is a lot of positive to think about in Scotland. We value and celebrate our diverse minority ethnic communities, their contributions and the role they play in enriching the country in so many ways. And I think it does make a huge difference that there's clear public leadership from the First Minister, from the STUC, from civic society. But it's been suggested to me a few times recently that we don't have racism in Scotland. And I'm here today to tell you, yes, we do. And we better acknowledge it if we want progress. We are not immune from racism. We're not special. But we do have a fair wind behind us, and there is a desire for change in many quarters. So let's use that to move forward and make a practical difference. I first went on an STUC anti-racism march about 15 years ago, pushing my wee baby in a pram, because I wanted to stand up and be counted on his behalf. He's nearly an adult now, and I know we have made progress in Scotland, and I'm glad of that. But we need to do more. It's not enough now not to be racist. We have to be loudly and clearly anti-racist. Everyone must support our minority ethnic communities, and we need to condemn racism, condemn hate, and condemn injustice wherever we see it. Our reaction, how we deal with this time, this situation, that's how we will be judged. And that's what's going to make a difference to the country that my children and your children will grow up in. So it's really good to see this strength of feeling. And the positive words and sentiments are a really good start, but we do now need action. We need structural change in all areas of society, in politics, in the workplace, in our daily lives. We all need to appreciate that Black Lives Matters is not just the slogan of the day. We can't nod sadly and then go back to the same old, same old. If this is not the moment for us to stand up, confront racism head on and commit to making that structural change, then it never will be. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Kirsten. I think you're right. You know, I mean, I think ultimately at this point, Black Lives Matters is the current campaign that we want people to get in behind, but it comes on layers and layers and layers of campaigns over many, many, many years. And what we want to see during this time, particularly with lockdown and the impact that COVID-19 is having on particular groups, I think what we want to see is different groups of people coming in behind this particular issue of discrimination, you know, of inequality. And as I've said, it's not just inequality around Black people, it's around women, people with disabilities. Within the STUC, we've been trying to work with our equality groups in a little bit more of a collaborative way to deal with those issues. And I think that that's something that has to spread out to wider society. So thanks very much for that input. Okay, so I think lastly, we have Anna Sarwar MSP, who's the Scottish Labour MSP for Glasgow and convener of the Scottish Parliament cross-party group on tackling Islamophobia. Anna, it's good to see you.
You too, Gozi, and to all the people watching, good evening, Assalamu alaikum, namaste, shalom, sir sri akal. Gozi, listening to the debate over the last few days, I struggle between anger, sadness, and often loneliness as well. And I know I can't be alone in that struggle. So I want to say to everyone that is on this call, everyone that is watching, and everyone indeed around the world, my solidarity is with you, my thoughts are with you, and my prayers are with you. Because this is a difficult period as we come through not just a pandemic, a viral pandemic, and move towards what I think is a mental health pandemic, but we're also living through a virus and a pandemic of prejudice, of hatred, and of division. I don't think we can look at this incident in isolation. I don't think we can just look at what's happening in America or look at what's happening in Scotland in isolation. I think sadly we're living in a world where you see nationalism, populism on the rise, where you see far too often politicians who will try and create an us versus them narrative, who will pick on their minority communities to try and win support amongst a majority, to try and get hold of power, power in terms of democratic power, but power in terms of economic power as well. You see it in the US with the discrimination against Black people. You see it in the UK in terms of discrimination against minority communities. You see it in Russia, you see it in Syria, you see it in India, and the actions against the Kashmiri people. Right around the world, minority communities are being othered, attacked, and being done so for power and for money. And unless we can confront that nature of populism and nationalism, we are not going to defeat this viral pandemic that has got us right across the world. People are looking at America at the moment, quite rightly looking at America at the moment and the actions of Donald Trump. But I want to caution people on not believing that racism started with Donald Trump or it ends with Donald Trump. There is no doubt that Donald Trump has mainstreamed illegitimate, backward, racist, and hateful views. But Trump is a symptom. He is not the cause. Right around the world, we've got to confront the cause and not just the symptom. So I support the calls that people are making for us to stop selling tear gas, riot gear, and other supplies to the US. We should immediately suspend all of those sales to the US. We should immediately review our relationship with the US in view of their attack on peace, on democracy, and on protest. And just think for a moment, if the scenes that we had seen outside the White House in the last week had been outside the any other nation in the world where there was peaceful protest against discrimination, and you saw the riot police, and you saw the attacks, and you saw the tear gas, we would be condemning that nation right around the world for its human rights violations, for its attack on freedom of speech, for its attack on freedom of protest, and for its attack on democracy. We'll be arguing for resolutions at the UN against any such nation. So the US should not have any double standard. We must condemn their actions in the strongest possible way, but also action that condemnation by taking necessary steps to put them in their place in terms of their acts on the world. I wanted to say a bit more about Scottish exceptionalism. I know other people have mentioned that today as well. You know, it's really easy for politicians to tweet. And look, I come at this not from a political perspective. I'm happy to criticise my own party or any other party or any political leader, and indeed my own communities as well when I think they're getting it wrong. But it's too easy for leaders of our political parties, leaders of our institutions, leaders of our organisations to tweet solidarity messages with Black Lives Matter when it's trending right around the world and there is this global movement. But actually what we will ultimately judge our leaders on, leaders of our institutions, leaders of our public political parties, leaders of our public services, we will judge you on the actions you take and the decisions you make. And let's just look at what the situation is in Scotland. Only 4% of our public sector workers come from a BAME background in Scotland. If you look right across Scotland, there is not a single ethnic minority person that is the chief executive of a council, that is the chief executive of a health board, that is the principal of a university or a college, that is the head teacher of a school, that is the chief executive of any government or local government department. None. That is the chair of any public sector board right across the country. None. Not one. Why? Is it because they don't have the talent? Is it because they don't have the ability? No. It's one, because they're not selected for those positions. And secondly, in many of these institutions, they do not feel that they are welcome or wanted. And one prime example of that is our media industry. When are we going to call out the fact that there are many people who believe that our media industry perpetuates and amplifies hatred rather than challenges and helps to defeat hatred? Now, I'm a believer in a free press. I respect and adore our Scottish press, even when it's difficult for me, myself. But what are we going to do to reflect and change ourselves through this incident and through this pandemic of hatred that we're seeing right around the world? What are social media platforms going to do? When are they going to recognize their responsibility? Because the reality is, for so many people, they use Facebook, they use Twitter, they use WhatsApp, they use other social media platforms to organize, to recruit, to spread their message, to fundraise, and to attack, and to silence, and to other. And unless we stop that from happening, unless we take action from that from happening, then we're going to continue to see hatred and prejudice spread, not just in Scotland, but indeed right around the world. Because what does it actually mean in practice? We can talk about the criminal justice system. We can talk about standout cases like George Floyd, and we rightfully should talk about standout cases like George Floyd. We rightfully should talk about standout cases like Sheku Bayoh's case. We rightfully should demand justice, not request justice, but demand justice for them and their families. We should rightfully call out those actions. But actually, the everyday racism that we're talking about impacts on life chances and life opportunities and life outcomes for thousands, hundreds of thousands of our fellow citizens. It's the children that are too scared to go to school the morning after a terrorist attack because they're worried what might be said to them. It's the women who might wear a religious symbol, whether it be a headscarf or anything else, that's too scared to take the public transport system because their hijab might be ripped off their head or what might be said to them. It's the sisters that are too scared to sit on one of our public transport buses because someone might swear at them or spit at them. It's the people who are having to change their names on their CVs because they know they're 3 times less likely to be called for interview if their name is Mohammed than if their name is Adam. It's the people who are in workplaces where they're told to keep quiet and allow people to abuse them, to swear at them, and to be racist to them because it's part of the job. It's all those retail workers on the front line who are, by the way, helping to put food on people's tables right around this country who are being every day on the front line of racial abuse, or the taxi drivers, or the people in retail stores, or people in the front line in other parts of our public services as well. It's all those people who are every single day impacted. And I want to say another thing about that impact, which is just think what it means for our children and the next generation. I used to naively believe, and I criticize myself for this, I naively believed, I remember making speeches and making contributions 10 years ago, where I naively said that I believed there was a chance that my children would grow up in a post-racial world, where people might actually look at them for the ability that they had, not the colour of their skin or their faith. And I've got to tell you, brothers and sisters, and I say this with heartbreak, I don't believe that to be true anymore. I genuinely believe that the children, the world that my children are going to grow up is a more hate-filled and more divided world, the one that I or anybody else grew up in as well. And that pains me. That hurts me. And one of the reasons why it hurts me is because I passionately call Scotland my home. I believe Scotland is my home, despite the fact that I get the same questions as most other people get about where are you from? No. Where are you really from? No. Where are your parents from? Or where are you originally from? But I believe this is my home. But if you look at the generations, I'm a third generation member, Scot. I'm a third generation Scot. When my grandparents came here in the 1940s, they probably identified themselves as Pakistani first before they were anything else. They thought they would come over here, they would work, they would eventually go back home. So they still had that attachment primarily with Pakistan. And then my parents' generation came here, and they probably saw themselves as, having been born in Pakistan, probably saw themselves as Pakistani Scots, Pakistanis perhaps first, but still passionate Scots, that dual identity. And then me, a third generation, I do see myself as a Scot first before anything else, but I still have an affinity and a connection with my parents' home and my grandparents' home, original home of Pakistan. But my children, your children, they only know Scotland. They're not going anywhere else. They can't pack up and leave. This is their home. They see themselves as equal Scots. And when people start to question their belonging, that's going to be really, really tough for every single one of them. What we're going to do about that is going to be a massive challenge for each and every single one of us. And one way that we can confront that is what we do in our education system. I believe we're going to defeat prejudice, not through our criminal justice system, although that is important, but through our education system. Why aren't we teaching the true history to our children? Why is it that we whitewash our history in terms of 2 world wars that this country fought in, when there was a diverse people, black people, brown people, people from all faiths and none, who came together in defense of this country to make it what it was? Why don't we teach the true history to our children? Why don't we teach them why Glasgow is what it is, how it built its success? If we teach that true legacy, then perhaps we can confront our past and send a message to the haters that actually we should be looking down on migrant communities or people that look different. These people that look different to you help make this country what it was and have an equal stake in this country's future. That's the best way to defeat the far right and make people believe and feel like this is their home. But we've also got to look at what it means for the gender divide, because right across all the different forms of prejudice, there is a gender nature to prejudice as well. I don't think it's a coincidence that you are more likely to be the victim of a hate crime if you're a woman than if you're a man. And you are almost definitely likely to be a man if you are the perpetrator of that hate crime. How do we recognize the intersectional nature of hatred to make sure we are defending women, sisters in our communities who are the target of this hatred? And the last thing I want to say, Gozi, because I know I've probably spoken for a bit too long or longer than I expected. The last thing I want to say is a direct message to people of all faiths and all communities is, please don't see this as somebody else's fight. Please don't. If you look at yourself and think, I'm not black, this is not a fight for me. You know what? You're letting yourself down, you're letting your children down as well. If you're not Muslim and you're thinking, no, there's Islamophobia out there, it's not my fight, it's somebody else's fight, you're wrong. If you're not Jewish and you look at it and say anti-Semitism is not my fight, it's somebody else's fight, If you're not gay, you think, okay, LGBT rights is not my fight, homophobia is not my fight, it's somebody else's fight. Or if you're not a woman, you think, oh, sexism is not my fight, it's somebody else's fight, then you're wrong. Because we will only ever defeat prejudice. We will only ever see an end to anti-Semitism, to Islamophobia, to homophobia, to sexism, to racism, and all other forms of prejudice if we build solidarity with each other. If we fight other people's fights, those people will come and fight our fights for us as well. So I say particularly to people from ethnic minority communities and Muslim communities, stand up and fight for other causes, and people will come and fight with you in your cause as well. And through that fight, we can change the future of Scotland. We can change the future for our children, and we can defeat the politics of Donald Trump. We can defeat the politics of hatred. We can defeat the politics of division and have the politics of unity be fashionable again. Thank you so much.
Anas, thank you very much for that. Everything that you said totally resonated, particularly that last point about, you know, community cohesion. You know, we live in communities. We don't live in isolation. We live alongside other people, and it's important to have a certain level of tolerance, respect, and understanding. I took your first point as well with regards to mental health and how people are coping at this time. I've got, you know, a reasonable size house, a garden. I know that lots of the communities and people that we are talking about don't have the resource to be able to lock down and just push aside the aspects of coronavirus in a way that's, you know, gets them through day to day. I also just wanted to say that importantly, this is about bringing it back to the campaign for Sheku Bayoh's justice. We need to keep an eye on that. We absolutely need to keep an eye on that. And within the trade union movement and with our elected members, with other organisations, community organisations, there's no reason why we shouldn't continue with some of the momentum, particularly on the back of the public inquiry that we now have seen has been granted. You know, I am sad as well that we're having to do this, but I'm also really proud that we've brought people together to do this. So, you know, we have to take the balance, and we have to also just realise that we need to celebrate diversity. You know, be angry, be frustrated, but also celebrate the diversity in your communities. And I know that that looks a bit weird at the moment online or whatever, but think about those things and how they impact on the positive message that we're trying to give. Now, I'm going to round up, but I just wanted to ask if anyone had any particular questions, comments that they wanted to put in at this point. Remember, this is going live on Facebook and it's also being recorded. And if you can raise your hand, or I don't have enough connectivity on my phone to see people, but if there's anything that you want to comment on. Right, okay. So David says we can't do that. Most of the links and information have been put on the STUC Facebook page. I think we're just going to wrap this up, bring it to a close. It's been just, I suppose, quite useful to see that we can have these kind of discussions at this time. I'd like to thank all the speakers. Everybody has brought, you know, a lot of passion and eloquence to what we're talking about in terms of our Sheku Bayoh campaign. I do have a number of texts that have come into the chat room, but I can't access them. So I'm going to speak with the STUC to make sure that they're circulated. I think it's just important to remember that while we're in lockdown, we have to think about ensuring that we continue the fight against racism and ensure that we have solidarity. So do please support in the first instance the Justice for Sheku Bayoh campaign if you haven't already done so, and the details are on the STUC social media. That brings the meeting pretty much to an end. Again, like I said, I'd like to thank you all for taking part. Stay as well as you can, stay safe, and stay active. Thank you, Hannah.
Oh, where are you now? Where have you gone? Sheku Bayoh, Sheku Bayoh, Kirkcaldy man from Sierra Leone. I didn't bring my guitar, but good Lord, the May of Sunday, 2015. I like to the story of lovely Nathan. Nine police come on and come to the gun with rats and handcuffs, even make us Sheku Bayoh, Sheku Bayoh, the family man was all I knew. The police come, try to run Sheku Bayoh, Sheku Bayoh. Stephen House at the top, just the same as every other cop. Violence, silence, it's always been their way. Don't believe a single one they say. Sheku Bayoh, Sheku Bayoh, the family man. All I know, the police come. Try to run Sheku Bayoh, Sheku Bayoh. I feel no shame. Do you talk? I try and break blame. To police Scotland, up to the SNP. Yeah, all that man, I just want them all to see. Sheku Bayoh, Sheku Bayoh, the family man was all I knew. The police come. Try to run Sheku Bayoh, Sheku Bayoh, to join the family, one and all. Truth and justice, they must be a call. It's true that everyone's under attack, but it's actually true that it's getting black. Sheku Bayoh, Sheku Bayoh, the family man was all I knew. The police come. Try to run Sheku Bayoh, Sheku Bayoh.
One, to remember Sheku, and two, to speak for him, because now he can't speak for himself. So we pressed for time, so we'll start with the press conference, and I'll let Mr. Aamer kick it off. And then once we're done, then we'll have the next on schedule.
Thank you. My name's Aamer Anwar. I'm the acting solicitor for Sheku Bayoh's family. On behalf of Sheku Bayoh's family, I'd like to welcome everyone today and thank you for your love and your solidarity over the last 5 difficult weeks. Just to advise that over the next half hour to hour, you will hear statements from the family about their search for truth. This session is entitled as a press conference, but it's as much a public meeting for the people of this community and for the friends of Sheku Bayoh to know what has happened up until now and to learn what Sheku Bayoh's family and friends intend to do in the weeks and the months ahead. There will be an opportunity, I hope, for questions at the end of this session if we have time. Now, I never knew, like some people in this room, Sheku Bayoh, and it's clear to me Sheku Bayoh wasn't a rich or powerful man with lots of connections, but what I have learnt in the 5 weeks since his death is that he has a stubborn family. 3 sisters, his mother, his brother-in-law Adi, and his partner Colette, who have refused to be patronised, refused to be bullied, lied to, or silenced. They have tried desperately to keep an open mind on what happened in Hayfield Road 5 Sundays ago. And despite the attempts to provoke and insult them, they have remained dignified, but full of rage because they are not asking for anything special, just the truth. And because without truth, there can be no justice. All our hearts go out to Colette, whose son Isaac will never see Sheku again, but because of her love, she has said she will not be silenced. I also want to extend my condolences to Connie, the mother of 3-year-old Tyler, who will also never see his dad again. Sheku Bayoh was a well-liked, healthy young man who at the age of 31 had no previous history of violence. It would appear he left his home sometime between 7 and 7:15 a.m. and walked an approximate distance of a mile down to Hayfield Road, where we gathered at lunchtime. Police officers who were in the midst of a shift change at KIRCALDY Police Office responded to an alert following calls from members of the public that a black man was walking down the street with a knife. We are advised that some 2 police vans, 3 marked police cars and 1 unmarked car went to the scene, and that a minimum of 9 uniformed police officers along with 2 CID attended. We understand that 4 police officers reached there first and engaged with Sheku Bayoh. A struggle took place, and what we can confirm is that out of those 4 police officers, the policewoman talked about by the Police Federation was part of this group. She was not on her own. 5 other officers arrived very shortly afterwards. There has been a great deal of speculation about what happened, and while some have been desperate to paint a version for the benefit of themselves or of the media, the family have tried to keep an open mind, and what happened is a matter for a live investigation. But they are entitled to say that Sheku Bayoh never deserved to die. If anyone has information in this room or in this community that they have not provided to the police or to the PERC for whatever reason, I would urge you to contact PERC. If you don't feel comfortable doing that, then to contact Sheku's family or my office. As for what happened, you will appreciate we have been given a great deal of information over the last 5 weeks that we cannot release into the public domain, despite others who insist on releasing snippets of what happened that morning. We do know as a fact from CCTV and from statements received that no officer was ever on their own. We know as a fact that CS spray, Pava spray, a form of pepper spray, and batons were used by officers who first engaged with Sheku Bayoh. In the last 5 weeks, the family state there appears to have been from some quarters of the police a disturbing images of violence being created, ascribing repeatedly to a large man stereotypical characteristics of extraordinary strength and dangerousness, an attempt to blame Sheku Bayoh for his own death. The family wanted to state in public, for a start, Sheku Bayoh was not 6 foot plus. He was 5 foot 10 inches, 2 inches smaller than me. He weighed 12 stones, 10 pounds. lighter than myself. The negative imagery as far as the family are concerned has deliberately been used to enforce an image of a mad and dangerous man. None of this has been helpful in searching for the truth, but it has compounded the agony of the family, who feel as though they have been deliberately provoked in an attempt to try and get them to react. Let me say this in response of the family. Police officers at all times are expected to be professionals. Police officers, of course, have a right to defend themselves, but any use of force must at all times be lawful, necessary, and proportionate in the circumstances. We understand that several other officers who arrived on the scene also intervened, that Sheku Bayoh was brought to the ground as several officers tried to apply handcuffs to the rear and managed to put on leg restraints. He was in what is known as the prone position, face down. There was a struggle, but at this stage he wasn't going anywhere and he would never get up again himself. As they tried to apply the handcuffs, we know that Sheku Bayoh began to lose consciousness. Many people have asked, what is the cause of death? Many people have speculated. Many people at the start, who should know better, tried to talk about what was going to happen with regards to the post-mortem, and what we can say here and now is that there is no answer. We do not know the cause of death. That is yet to be determined. The Crown Office have instructed 2 senior Crown pathologists. The family have instructed 2 independent pathologists, Professor Anthony Basutil, who is probably the most senior forensic pathologist in Scotland, as well as the UK's foremost forensic pathologist, Dr. Nat Carey, who dealt and deals with the Hillsborough inquest cases, as well as the Soham murders. Positional asphyxiation has been floated and is suspected, but the post-mortem is inconclusive, as the pathologists, both the Crown and the independent pathologists, do not have the circumstances in which Sheku Bayoh died. Positional asphyxia is a form of asphyxia which occurs when someone's position prevents the person from breathing adequately. A significant number of people have died suddenly during restraint by police officers in this country. Research suggests that restraining a person in a face-down position is likely to cause greater restriction of breathing than restraining a person face-up. And we know that police officers in the United Kingdom are supposed to be taught to avoid restraining people face down, or to do so only for a very short period of time. We also know that the use of CS spray is supposed to be carefully monitored, because it can also bring about positional asphyxiation. This is a complicated inquiry. There are a number of risk factors which may increase the chance of death, but the way the subject is restrained can only increase the risk of death. For example, kneeling on someone, or otherwise placing weight on the subject. However, we do not know the cause of death, but this is one of the areas that is being investigated. After Sheku lost consciousness, CPR was attempted at the scene. This was around 7:34 a.m. CPR was then attempted in the ambulance, which arrived at 7:45 at Victoria Hospital. Many staff, we know now, 14 staff, desperately tried to save Sheku's life, for which his family will be eternally grateful. But he was officially pronounced dead at 9:04 a.m. We also now know that when Sheku Bayoh arrived at the hospital unconscious, that he was still handcuffed, with leg restraints still in place, which the doctors demanded the removal of. The family believed this was inappropriate and absolute disgrace. We understand that reports were released in the minutes after Sheku lost consciousness of a policewoman having been stabbed, which several hours later Police Scotland retracted and corrected as being untrue. The family want to know who is responsible for releasing those reports, who was responsible for briefing the local politicians with false information. Following Sheku's death, Cllr returned to her home at around 9 a.m. She found the house in disarray, the back door lying open. Sheku was not at home, so as she left, she spoke to his best friend Zahid, who told her of Sheku not being himself and a fight that they had had in the early hours. She left to go to her mum's and she phoned the police. When she returned, just after 9 o'clock, a police car with 2 uniformed officers and 2 CID were waiting for her. They took her into her house. CID sat her down, whilst Uniform went into the kitchen for a few minutes. For what purpose? Cllr does not know. We now know that the CID and other officers had been briefed about the circumstances of Sheku Bayoh as early as 10 minutes past 8 that morning. They did not tell her that Sheku was dead and began to ask her questions about him to build up a picture and get as much detail as they could. Meanwhile, a few minutes away, a full-scale Fife police operation had been taking place before the PIRC, the independent investigators, could arrive. The police officers told Cllr that they needed to take her to the police station. Before leaving, they took her house keys off her, and when she asked why, their explanation was that it was a crime scene, which she did not understand. After arriving at the police station, and much toing and froing and confusion, and she sat there with Lorraine, her mother, at around 11 o'clock, 2 CID eventually told her in the room that there was no easy way of saying this, but her partner, Shek, was dead. They said, and I quote, that he was found on a public street by a member of the public. They said that it was the member of the public who called for an ambulance, but he died on the street. Meanwhile, we have learned that at the same time that Cllr was in that police station, that all nine of the officers had returned to the station and were placed in the same room together from 9 a.m. towards 11 a.m. before a senior officer arrived to try to speak to them. Those officers left that police station and left that room later on that evening. Cllr, in the meantime, at that police station was distraught as the 2 officers delved deep into Sheku's background, his friends, as they tried to build a picture of him, as they tried to ask her if there was any conflict in her relationship. Never once did they tell her that Sheku died in police custody. She was allowed to go home at around 1 p.m. and told to contact Sheku's family. Those same 2 officers attended at Kadie's home, Sheku's sister, and the same systematic lies were replayed out until they then returned at 4:30 p.m. that day, that Sunday, and told Kadie and Adi and her family that their gaffer had told them to tell them that Sheku had actually died in police custody. Following understandable anger from the family and demands, Adi asked who the gaffer was, and he was told it was a Chief Superintendent, Gary McEwen, the area commander for Fife. Adi asked for that officer to attend his home because he knew him through the racial equality work within Fife within the next 24 hours, and Gary McEwen attended the family home by 5:30 and told the gathered family the first actual version of what happened to Sheku Bayoh when the police attended and engaged with him. Of the reports of a black man carrying a knife, the police responding, he told them that they used batons, they used CS spray, that they used restraints and handcuffs, that he lost consciousness and died. He then told the family not to speak to anyone or to the media, but just after he left their home, the police released a media release providing details of Sheku's death. Police Scotland, over those several hours, from 9 o'clock onwards, if not before, gave 5 different versions of events to the family. That is a matter of grave concern. Sensitive and thorough handling of the investigation into the golden hours following the death is critical to evidence gathering and setting direction and quality of the investigation to follow. The family does not understand, and I don't think there's anything unreasonable about this, but they do not understand why the officers who engaged with Sheku Bayoh were not immediately suspended without prejudice after his death. It's a matter of public concern that officers remain at their desks or in contact with the public pending the outcome of an investigation into a death in custody. For the Chief Constable to suspend officers without prejudice, the family states, is not a question of prejudging the outcome of the investigation, but it ensures neutrality, integrity of the investigation, transparency, and stopping officers conferring, as well as protecting those officers who were involved in the incident. This as much protects those police officers. PIRC, the Police Investigation Review Commissioners, we understand, were ordered to take control. This was an independent body that was set up in 2013 with the powers of arrest, detention, and the ability to seize evidence when investigating the police over serious incidents. They came onto the scene later that morning, but we understand that the 9 officers who had been in that room for some hours together for several hours refused to provide any details of what happened. We understand that the Federation subsequently stated that they wished to know what their status was, but the fact remains that PIRC stated publicly that they asked several times for statements which the police officers refused to provide. As police officers, they will know they had the essential information necessary for PIRC's investigation team. Officers will of course know that in any serious incident they should never be allowed to collude over their evidence and their statements of fact. The fact that for 32 days they refused to provide this information and that PIRC could do nothing about it beggars belief and compounds the agony of Sheku's family. The family strongly urged KIRCALDY police officers to cooperate with the investigation, to help provide their family, the Crown Office and PIRC with accurate information with how and why Mr. Bayoh died. There was nothing unreasonable about this demand. The family tried to remain open-minded, but neither the Crown pathologists or our own independent pathologists could reach a conclusion into the cause of death until a full account was provided by those officers of what happened that morning when they detained Sheku. The findings of the post-mortem are not complete, and it could still be several weeks before they are completed. And the family say this: nobody should be allowed to evade accountability or to frustrate the investigation process, and Sheku Bayoh's family will not rest until they have the truth. They have put their total faith in the Lord Advocate and in the PIRC, but it is not a blind and unconditional faith. The family will accept nothing less than a robust, independent, transparent, impartial inquiry that has no fear of where it leads them. The family appreciate that this is the most serious incident that PIRC has ever had to deal with since its inception in 2013, but there can be no more room for mistakes or naivety about the task that they face. I met Sheku's family for the very first time 2 days after he died, and I told them at the time that the way ahead would be a long one, full of struggle, full of heartache and resistance, that no family should have to do that. It's the job of the justice system in this country and the police service to serve the whole community. I hope that the people who are gathered here today, his friends, the people who worked with him, the people of Scotland will support this family in their struggle for truth and for justice in what will be a very long road ahead with many ups and downs. People look at our police service as a good example of what everyone should be doing across the world. But to be the best, to be the guardians of law and order, they need to act as public servants as well as earn our respect. They should never resent facing difficult questions because that is what is expected of them in a democracy. They must be accountable. Sadly, some of them have acted like juveniles, wishing to smear, wishing to insult, wishing to trade insults on social media and contaminate a picture. We appreciate that those who represent the police have a job to do, but why would anyone want to smear a family when they are grieving for a loved one? It's very sad that those paid to represent police officers should have chosen to engage in personal insults. The fact that they chose to do so in the week as Sheku's family prepared to bury him is beneath contempt, and the family asked them to stop. This week, the Bayoh family will insist that the Scottish Government immediately seek cross-party support for a change to the law, making it mandatory for officers to provide operational statements on their return to station after a death in custody. That fundamental flaw in the law which strips the powers of PIRCs in deaths in custody is unacceptable. We found out this week that PIRC, their powers are ripped away from them when it comes to a death in custody. And the family are asking, what exactly is the point of PIRC when the most serious thing that can happen to a police officer in the line of duty is when somebody loses their life? And as for the police, the family have said it again and again, and I say it on their behalf again today. If you have nothing to hide, then you have nothing to fear. This week, the Police Federation, on their Twitter page, quoted a section of the law. They did this on the 4th of June 2015, claiming that PERC didn't know what governs its existence. If police officers and those paid to represent them want to quote the law, it would help if they actually understood what it meant. The terrifying concern, which you can see on the front page of the Sunday Herald today, is that for Scotland, is that PERC was supposed to be an independent investigating body with the equivalent powers of the police, on a par with the English IPCC, able to arrest, able to detain, able to question, and able to demand evidence. Yet for some reason, PERC's powers have disappeared when it comes to a death in custody, and that doesn't make sense to the family and to the people who are asking the questions. Why should police officers be immune from having to speak to independent investigators? Why should PERC be powerless when it comes to a death in custody? Imagine if a surgeon or a social worker or a teacher, after a death in their care, refused to tell management what happened. There would be a total outcry. So why should police officers, public servants, be treated any differently? The mantra from the police in the last 5 weeks is, why should they not be treated the same as the members of the public and have the same rights? The family say, with respect, you are not the same. You are given the responsibility to be the guardians of law and order. You are given the powers of arrest. You are given the power to use CS, guns, tasers, handcuffs in reasonable and proportionate circumstances. And yes, of course, there will be times you will place your life on the line to protect us, the public. But all those powers carry a heavy responsibility, which means that you are not above the law, and you are expected to adhere to standards which no member of the public would be. And with standards come accountability, not silence, which is why the family chose to stop at Kirkcaldy police station today for those 2 minutes of silence. It took 32 days before 8 of the 9 police officers agreed to speak to PERC, and the family regard that as a disgrace. But even worse, what was that the PERC told us they couldn't do anything about it. Can you imagine if out of this room there were 9 members of the public who were allowed to walk the streets for 32 days after being involved in a death? Would the police treat them with kid gloves? Would they be allowed to refuse to provide statements? Would they be allowed to refuse to speak to the police? Would their doors not be knocked on and dragged out of their beds? Because we know, for instance, that Zahid, the friend, the best friend of Sheku Bayoh, was dragged into that police station and kept there for several hours. He was pushed to and fro. He was threatened because he refused to speak to them until he found out what happened. If that's what they did to the best friend, why the kid gloves with the police officers who knew what happened? The Lord Advocate, Police Scotland, as well as the Scottish Government must take action on this loophole that creates immunity for police officers before somebody else dies. And it's simply not good enough for the Scottish Government to say today in the Sunday Herald, we cannot comment on individual cases or ongoing investigations by PERC, which is under the direction of the Crown. We believe that the powers that PERC currently have are sufficient. The Sheku Bayoh family are telling the Scottish Government those powers are not sufficient. The Bayoh family have heard from PERC of their frustrations at their powers not being sufficient. And it's not good enough because the PERC tell us themselves it is a fundamental weakness. A powerful investigating body that holds the most powerful public body, the Police Scotland in our country, to account becomes nothing but a toothless body left begging for cooperation. That is unacceptable in a democracy. The case of Sheku Bayoh sadly is not an isolated case, but it's part of a systemic problem that allows the police to remain above the law, and that gaping flaw in our laws must be urgently addressed. Until it is, PERC will remain incapable of exposing the truth when people die in custody. I want to start closing off by saying that the campaign in the weeks ahead will approach the Scottish Government, will approach the Lord Advocate, asking them to urgently change the law with immediate effect, to enable the PERC to lawfully hold investigations with the available powers. What the family can no longer tolerate is for any police officer to hold up an investigation or threaten its outcome. No family should ever have to go through the burden of losing a loved one in police custody and then to find that the system fails them. The police should realise that they are our public servants and not our masters. And no family should ever have to rely on their own efforts to make sure the full facts about deaths are established and those responsible for deaths are held to account. Our Crown pathologists, the independent pathologists, urgently need the information. And there are many questions for PERC, which I list before I close. 1. The Family states Sheku Bayoh was a fit and healthy man who lost consciousness less than 15 minutes after being engaged by the police. How and why did Sheku, who appeared to be physically healthy, come to suddenly die in this way? 2. The level of force used on Sheku Bayoh, was it reasonable and was it proportionate? 3. How was he restrained and whether it led to positional asphyxiation? 4. What pressure was applied and how? 5. Were police guidelines or trainings regarding restraint, use of CS spray, pepper spray, batons and positional asphyxiation sufficient, or were they followed correctly? 6. As they held him down and tried to apply handcuffs to him, he was in the prone position throughout the entire restraint. How long was he held in this position and what body weight was applied to him? 7. Why was there an absence of leadership from the moment that Sheku lost his life? 8. Who ordered the police officers to systematically lie to Cllr and Sheku's family over the course of the next 7 hours? And 9. Why did the police take control of Cllr and Sheku's house under false pretenses? And 10. The family want to know whether it was appropriate to leave Sheku Bayoh, a dying man, in handcuffs and leg restraints when he was put in an ambulance and arrived at the hospital. And there are many other questions that remain, but nothing will bring Sheku Bayoh back. But his family want to know that justice will be done. In the hours after his death, his family were treated shoddily with no respect. At no point could they confidently state that what happened to Sheku from the information given to them by the authorities. At no time were they consulted on where Sheku's body should be taken or about the post-mortem. I'll state this here today. Sheku's family asked for the post-mortem not to be carried out until his mother, Aminata, had arrived in Scotland. She arrived on Tuesday, and when they sat at my office, I phoned the PERC, only to be told then that the post-mortem had happened already the day before, leaving the family distraught. At no time were the decisions perceived as being more important than those of the institutions, even though Sheku Bayoh doesn't belong to an institution. He was part of the Bayoh family. And I want to conclude by saying this. Sheku's mother, Aminata, wants people to think of her only son not as a man who died following a struggle with the police. She wants people to remember him as a bright young man who any parent would have been proud of. He was a wonderful son, he was a wonderful brother, a wonderful uncle, a good friend, a loving partner to Cllr, and a shining example of what any child would want in a father. As a parent myself of 3 young children, I know how much pain as a parent you feel when your child falls, when your child bleeds, or when they're sick, and when they're burning up through the night with a temperature. And I cannot imagine, because I know as a parent you desperately want your child to be okay. I cannot imagine what a mother must feel when she loses her only boy, knowing that she will never see him again. And sadly, he is not by any means the first man to die in police custody. But if anything, I hope that Sheku Bayoh's name does not fade from memory, and that one day the name of Sheku leaves us a legacy that his children can be proud of. I hope, Sheku, as you look down at us today, that you're proud of the love for you, that one day you will be able to rest in peace, but there can be no peace until there is justice, because without truth, there can be no justice, and that is what his family is fighting for. Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to ask Cllr, Sheku's partner and the mother of Isaac, to say a few words on his behalf.
Since I was not given the opportunity to say goodbye to Sheku, I want to take this opportunity to read him a poem. The moment that you died, my heart was torn in two. One side filled with heartache, the other died with you. I often lie awake at night when the world is fast asleep and take a walk down memory lane with tears upon my cheeks. Remembering you is easy, I do it every day, but missing you is heartache that never goes away. I hold you tightly within my heart, and near you will remain, until the joyous day arrives, until I see you again. Now we have laid you to rest, I promise not to stop until we have justice for you.
But the truth. What the lawyer said is exactly what happened to him. He suffered a lot before he died. That's why I will never forget him. He's the only man I had. The three girls. May his soul rest in peace. Once again, I thank you all those who are present here, those who came from London, all over the world. I thank you very much. May God bless you all. May God bless all of you.
The next person asked to speak is Cllr Baker, who's MSP in the Labour Party and an MSP from Fife.
I'm pleased to be here today. I'm here for the same reason that all of you are here, is to support the family and find out answers to what happened on that day. It is the family deserve answers. We shouldn't have to be demanding answers, but that is the situation that we find ourselves in. The people who are accountable must be held to account. There must be a transparent inquiry and investigation into this. The family need to have confidence in that investigation. It must be the priority of the Lord Advocate's Office, of the PIRC and of Police Scotland, who are all organisations I have been in contact with, trying to move this case forward and make sure we all get answers. It is 5 weeks since this happened, and we still feel the frustration of the family as how this is going. I met with the family 2 weeks ago at their invitation, and when I left that meeting, I was so angry and hurt and frustrated about what this family is having to go through, and anything I can do to try and support and help them in this very difficult time, I will do. We will look at the changes that have been suggested to the law. If the law is not fit enough for this type of situation and changes need to be made, then so be it. We have to make those changes. I am proud to live in Scotland. I'm sure all you are too. We want to be proud of our country, but this current situation is extremely worrying. I understand the family's lack of confidence in going forward. We need to make sure you have confidence and the family have confidence that we can get justice for Sheku going forward into the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cllr. Next speaker is Sheku Bayoh, who was the eldest sister of Sheku.
Good evening, everyone. I want to thank my family, friends, for taking your time this evening to grace Shek's funeral, that it came out to be a big success today. I just want to say that we've laid Shek to rest, but his campaign will still carry on. As you've heard from the lawyer, that's what happened to Shek. We won't rest until we get justice for Shek and to get the truth. We just want to say that we've got the UKRN Facebook page as well as Sheku Bayoh RIP@gmail.com email for your support for Sheku. So that will still carry on. We just want justice for Sheku, and we want each and every one of you to help us raise that justice for Sheku. I thank you all once again for your support. Thanks, everybody. God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheku. Just to say, in terms of what Sheku says, I hope that every single one of you signed up to the Facebook page. There are going to be motions that will be going out to every political party in this country, trade union motions, motions for your places of work, to get behind it, to get your local community to back it, your organisation, your churches, your mosques, your temples, or whoever it is, to basically sign up and to have as much public weight behind the family's demands for the truth and they need to support. This is a long path ahead. The next person who has been the driving force within this campaign is Kadie Johnson, who's the brother-in-law of Sheku Bayoh.
I'd like to reiterate what Anwar has said, Kusna has said, the mom, and Claire Baker have said. It's a sad time for us to come together, but at the same time, it's the time for us to reflect and think that, do we want something like this to happen at our own doorstep, at our neighbor's doorstep, at our friends or family? So I believe the answer to that is going to be no. So I would like to ask everyone here today, the public, our friends, to start the no now. Let's put a stop to it now, so that it never happened again. So please, the campaign has just started. It's going to be a long road, and we need to put a stop to it for everyone. Please support the campaign and support us. Members of the public have come out to show that they love Shek as Shek loved the community. I'd like to say thank you.
The last speaker is Anwar, who's Sheku's uncle.
Thank you very much, Mr. Anwar. With your permission, I would like to take us just a step back. Can we all rise, please? Can we say the Al-Fatiha? Those who cannot say it, just say Amen. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. Amen. Please be seated. Mr. Anwar, Mr. Ade and Satu, my dear Sisi Ami, Colette and Mom, Kusna, KK and Adama, brothers and sisters, friends of the late Sheku, well-wishers and relatives. As Mr. Anwar was speaking, there are three things that I picked up on. We will have lost Sheku, but the loss is even greater because of the insult which the police have extended to the family. Secondly, the police have just twisted, quoting the law in media. But what I picked up from that is that they seem to know their obligation. But you ask them what is their responsibility, that is what they lack. Because if they had known their responsibility, the manner of arrest, the spray, the handcuffs, and the way in which he was held were all wrong. Thirdly, Britain claimed to be the mother of democracy, and we're asking nothing more, nothing less, justice for our brother. If you're sure of what you've done, don't be shy to come out and say it. They may think they have won because they're hiding the facts. But let me guarantee you one thing. In the English language, they said what goes around comes around. We believe in Allah, and He is the greatest judge of everything, dead or alive, and His justice will prevail on behalf of Sheku. Sincerely, I know it's difficult, but as a Muslim, even at the graveyard today in the mosque, we are reminded Allah gives and takes at will. It's a hard fact, but that is nothing He can change. And death is one thing nobody knows when it shall come. What we know is we will all have to go through it. And the difference is we pray that none of us will go through what Sheku went through. I know we're running out of time, and after my talk, if you see some of people are leaving, some of us are going by road, and our vehicles are limited to 60 miles an hour. So imagine driving from here down to Reading at 60 miles an hour. It takes you something like 8 to 12 hours with stops. So don't think that we are going home, we have to travel a long distance, and some people have got to go to work tomorrow. And Mr. Anwar, count on the family for support in whatever manner, and I'll be engaging the High Commission in London. Whatever instruments, whatever thing that is within our grips, we'll use it, and like Mr. Adi said, to help put a stop to this kind of injustice. Thank you so much, and those of us who are traveling, may the Lord take us safely. Thank you.
We've got a very short time for any questions from the floor. If somebody wants to put their hands up, identify themselves. At the back.
My name is Uche. I also live here in KIRCALDY. I was listening to the number of questions that you have indicated that needs to be answered. I do believe that one of the questions that possibly is missing, which may help also, is to ask, what was Sheikh's last words? What did he say when they were restraining him? I think I would like to hear that. Thank you.
My name is Momo Sawi. I'm from London. I'm a brother-in-law of late Mr. Sheku Bayoh. My question here is, I want to know if the IPCC have any authority demand for the immediate suspension of the police officers who were involved in that tragic event. Thank you.
Sorry, I think the understanding that question was something to do with IPCC. In Scotland, we have a different legal system, which PERC was set up, the Police Investigations Review Commissioner was set up in 2013 to be on the same par as the IPCC. It was supposed to have the same powers as the IPCC, and it was supposed to be treated as the same powers as police constables have, which is arrest, detention, compulsion, and collection of evidence. What we've now subsequently found out is the dangerous situation is that there's two ways the PERC can do their investigation. They have serious incidents, either the Chief Constable can instruct them, they carry out an investigation, they have all those powers. But in the most serious cases, which is Sheku Bayoh's, where a death occurs in custody, all of a sudden those powers disappear because they're instructed by the Lord Advocate, and that's what we're saying is fundamentally flawed, because if this was England, that wouldn't be the case. And if we were going to match it or beat England, there's no point in Scotland for us talking about the Human Rights Act. There's no point in talking about Scotland being way ahead on the question of democracy, justice, etc., unless we resolve this flaw so it doesn't happen to another family again.
Yes, my question is, if your very vigorous campaign to get this case, carried forward fails, and if the MSP member also is not able to effect a change in the law, what chances do you have of taking out a private prosecution?
What I'll say right here and now is that failure is not an option. This matters to the people of Scotland. If the number of people who turned up in a small town like Kirkcaldy today is a reflection of anything, the people on the streets who I saw with tears in their eyes, then I think that mood can be reflected across Scotland. And they should understand this, and this is a warning to them, whoever they may be, those in public authority, that the rage and anger of a family, but their dignity and their quietness should not be mistaken, because they are full of anger and they are full of rage, and they are determined to get justice and to get the truth. This is the first time that PERC has come onto this situation, so they will be held to account, as will the Crown Office, as will Police Scotland, and as will the Scottish Government. And so failure is not an option. Our community, I think, is tired of grieving at gravesides. We want a time when the successes and the lives of our brothers and sisters are celebrated, rather than grieving at graveside. So, as I said at the end of what I spoke earlier on, that Sheku's family desperately want there to be a legacy out of what happened, and if it means fundamental change in the system, then so be it, so that no other family has to go through this again. But in order to do that, we need support right across Scotland, from the trade unions, from the communities, from ordinary people. And the family have said it again and again. You know, what happened up to the event when the police detained, engaged with Sheku Bayoh? Whatever it was, we will find out. But what the family want to know is, why did he die? And they want to know the truth. Simple as that.
Good afternoon, my name is Alan Kamara, I'm Shek's cousin. We have a saying, which it takes a village to raise a child. And my question is to the community, can I ask you lot please, because we're based down in London, so a lot of times all we can do is phone calls. Shek's children are going to need some brothers and sisters to be looking out for them. Please, can I beg you lot to look out for them? When you see them on the street, just be like, yo, those are Shek's boys, don't mess with them. Please. Thank you.
I'd like to formally close this session. I think somebody was coming up for a prayer.
We have Pastor Sherry to come up for prayer.
We can perhaps take a second just to be a bit quiet now and begin to turn our attention and ask God to help us in ways that we need His help. It's an honour for me to stand here before you. And the purpose of me being here is to lead us into Christian prayer. I would like to begin by reading psalm that is most common to most of us. Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Today, Father God, we thank you for Sheku Bayoh's life as we celebrate it in his life that he had with us, though it be very, very short. We thank you, Lord, for Sheku's life with us on this earth, and now his days have drawn to a close. But we are thankful that according to your word, that life does go on after this one for all eternity, as you have taught us in the word. Lord, you said in your word that you are the eternal God and our dwelling place, and underneath are your everlasting arms. How you loved the world that you gave your only begotten Son, so that whoever believes in him would have eternal life. Today we are believing that our precious Sheku Bayoh, being absent from his body now, is very present with you, and he will live forevermore. The very truth of this everlasting life will bring us comfort and is indeed our hope. Our prayers today is for Sheku's dear, dear, dear family and friends. And so we lift up his beloved mother, Aamer Bayoh, his siblings, Kosna, Kadie, Adema, and brother-in-law Adi. Very importantly, Sheku's beloved partner Colette and his beloved sons, Isaac and Cllr, and of course Tyler's mother. We are also remembering in our prayers, as we lift up all the family that will still be remaining in Sierra Leone, and all of his friends who are here today. And today, Lord, we believe that we can sense your presence in our midst. For according to your word in Romans, you have declared that neither death nor life, nor angels nor principalities, nor powers nor things present, nor things to come, nor height nor depth, nor any other created thing shall be able to separate us from the love of God, which is in Christ Jesus our Lord. O Lord God, we ask that you will strengthen all family and friends, uphold them in your love, comforting them even into the night when there may be no one else around, that you will help to guard them from that place of feeling that absolute aloneness, when their hearts are breaking and torn in two, that Jesus, you have promised to heal those broken hearts. And that, Father, we thank you that for all those that are mourning and the family and friends, that you have promised to comfort us and to comfort them. It is a hard and difficult time, Heavenly Father, for all those concerned with the tragic ending to young Sheku's life. Those close will no doubt be feeling, Father, the grief and the pressure. And therefore, O Lord God, be their helper in such a time of need. Be the glory and the lifter of their heads today. And Lord God, you alone who knows all hearts, who knows every single detail of the account which brought a sudden end to Sheku's life, we pray, Father, that light will be brought forth and justice totally and absolutely will come, so that all family and friends and all those concerned will then have peace in their hearts. remembering alone Sheku's lovely personality, which was one of fun, which was one of helpfulness, and which was one of being very light-hearted. Not only was he a help to his family and a good friend to his friends, but Father, we thank you because he was a great help within his community. So be our refuge and our strength, O Lord God, and a very present help in this troubled time. The Lord Jesus, you have taught us the importance of forgiveness and to keep an open heart. And so, Father, we pray that we can forgive all that would be concerned in any way whatsoever, so that we may be free to walk in the newness of life and enjoy the abundant life that you have promised us. Now may grace and peace from our Father and Lord Jesus Christ be with the family and friends and with us all today. And let us close with this prayer, which is the Lord's Prayer, and most of you know, in Matthew 6. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And do not lead us into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. For yours is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Amen. And now may the peace that passes understanding guard all of our hearts and our minds through Christ Jesus our Lord today. Amen. Amen. Thank you.
And I thank everybody. This session is now closed. One announcement that we wanted to make was that on Saturday the 13th of June, yes, at 7 p.m, and I believe is it the Blue? Anybody got Glasgow. Right.